Welcome to the podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest, Ren, CEO of Zama.
Hey guys.
And so we are going to talk about FHE, Zama, also just generally FHE and blockchain. So maybe just to start, for folks who don't know what FHE is, could you maybe give an explanation of what FHE is like in five, and then maybe a more technical explanation afterwards?
The idea of homomorphic encryption is that you can compute on encrypted data without actually having to see it. So for example, imagine I'm a user of an AI service in the cloud. Today, I would need to send data to the company operating the service so that they could analyze it and respond something back to me. This means that a company who's offering the service has access to all of its users' data. With homomorphic encryption, I would send them an encrypted query, so they wouldn't actually know what I'm asking. They have no idea how to actually understand it. But the way it was encrypted still allows you to run mathematical operations on it, which means they can run their service, produce a response which itself is encrypted and ununderstandable that I can decrypt on my side. So for me as a user, nothing changes. I'm just sending data to a server and I'm getting a response, but now things are encrypted when I send them and during processing, which means they're encrypted end to end.
So this almost feels like magic. The ability to just, compute on top of encrypted data just feels like a different form of cryptography that's very different from ZK, for example. So I guess like the next question is, what's kind of like the quick origin story of Zama? Why work on this project? Why is this a passion of yours?
So maybe before I get into that, homomorphic encryption is not a new idea. It's been around since the 70s. In fact, RSA, which is very well known for like public key encryption, is homomorphic. It's just that for a very long time, we didn't really know how to do what's called fully homomorphic encryption, meaning to do any kind of computation in FHE. We could do additions, we could do multiplications, but we couldn't, for example, run a neural network or a smart contract on encrypted data. This changed in 2010 with the first invention of fully homomorphic encryption, but it was way too slow. So the big breakthrough in the origin story of Zama is that my co-founder Pascal Payet ended up having a major breakthrough in cryptography that made FHE much, much, much faster and able to compute on any kind of data. So Pascal and I met 8 years ago, actually. In my previous company, I was looking at how to do confidential AI, and I stumbled across homomorphic encryption. I was like, damn, like this is obviously going to be the future. Like we have to do something around that. And so the first person I called was this French famous cryptographer called Pascal Payet, who turns out to have an office next to mine.
Yeah.
Right. So I reached out, I'm like, hey, Pascal, my name is Rand. I'm an AI founder. Can you explain to me FHE and what we can do with it? We couldn't do much, but we kept in touch. We remained friends. And when I sold my company, Pascal called me and said, hey, do you want to build a company in FHE together? And I was like, man, I don't know. Like my plan was to travel the world, relax a bit, but how often do you get a chance to build a company with the perfect co-founder based on a breakthrough in one of the most exciting and important technology of this decade?
Very cool. And I guess like timing-wise, the time you started Zama, has there anything, so besides the cryptography, anything else, any other trends that led to this breakthrough, or anything else that you thought that this was the right timing to start this?
I didn't think it was the right time to start it when we started the company. I just thought we could make it happen.
Okay.
So I think the nice thing about deep tech in general as a field is you have to create the market, right? If you're not creating the market, then the technology by definition already exists and you're no longer like a deep tech company. You're just building a product. So when Pascal came to me, and he exposed like what he had invented, I was like, this changes everything. Like we can actually make this work. Like the hard problem and the path to solving it, turning it into a product was very clear. But there was no product. It was just ideas on a whiteboard, effectively, and a couple of papers published. So it took us a while to actually go from this to having something that can be put in production and deployed to millions of people in the world.
Yeah, so I guess this is a very interesting point that you are sort of creating a completely new market. So I guess
we are creating a market.
I guess
right,
we are, which leads to the topic of FHE and blockchain, right? So maybe just to dive deeper into this, what are your thoughts on, the application of FHE in blockchain? Like generally, like what do you think is the most exciting, and then why does it make sense for the blockchain space?
When you think about blockchains, everything is public and transparent.
Yeah.
People think of this as a feature, but when you really look into it, it's not a feature. It was a necessary design choice in order to have distributed consensus. Because if computers across the world need to agree on what they've done, they need to share what they've done. And if you want this to be verifiable, well, it has to be public so that anybody can verify it. So it's not really that people wanted blockchains to be completely public. It's just that they had no choice. The good thing about FHE is you can still have public verifiability and consensus on computation, but the data you're computing on is encrypted.
Yep.
So you have exactly the same properties as you have with public blockchains, but now the data is encrypted. So what can you do with that? Well, let me ask you a question. How many of the Web2 products will you use if all the data was publicly available for anybody to see? Not very many, probably.
Not very many.
Right?
It'll be a very small subset.
So these are all the things we can now build in blockchain.
Yeah. And actually, I remember when I first joined the crypto space in 2017, that was the first impression I got is, okay, what can I build? Oh, you can only build use cases that make sense on a transparent database.
Exactly.
Which is very different from how Web2 works, right? Yeah. So I think, yeah, definitely, I think, like you said, the verifiability aspect of FHE makes a lot more sense to the blockchain space as a whole. Yeah.
So some use cases that we see people building, a lot of things around, of course, financial applications.
Yeah.
Just sending money to each other without people knowing how much we own and how much we're transferring to each other. So this, for example, opens up payroll. All of a sudden, you're like, hey, you can actually pay people confidentially for the job they're doing on chain. But maybe for payroll, you don't just need confidential transfers. You also need some identity to know that the person you're paying is the person that's supposed to be paid. So here, there is a second thing that I'm very excited about is this idea that you can actually have what I call identity abstraction on chain. So you can encrypt people's identity attributes, age, name, social security number, put that on a blockchain in a contract, and now you can have all of your other applications compose on the user's identity on chain like they would compose on a token. So that's huge, right? Like you can open up so many things, compliance for DeFi, for example. We might not like talking about compliance, but if you're going to be onboarding trillions of institutional money on blockchain, you got to figure this out. Something else that I'm particularly excited about is anything related to governance. When people know what you're voting for and how much voting power you have, there is a very strong incentive for bribery and blackmail.
Mm-hmm.
Vote for my proposal or, I'll make your life miserable.
Right.
Online bullying, right? All of these things. With FHE, you can have confidential voting. So for all of those DAOs, they're struggling with blackmailing and bribery and social pressure in their, proposals. All of that can disappear completely. And you can have an actual governance system that represents people through intentions because they no longer have to show everybody what they did. Like imagine voting for a president with everybody knowing what you voted for.
Right.
How many people would be embarrassed about what they really believe in? Right?
Exactly.
And of course, I think there's a lot of things around gaming. You probably know more about gaming than I do. But in general, like if you can't actually hide things during gameplay, like there are not very many games you can play. I mean, sure, okay, you can play chess and backgammon and things like that.
Yeah.
But most interesting games that we play online or that we play in the real world have some kind of secret that you need to keep during gameplay. And so this is something, again, we can do with FHE.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and totally agree. I think from a payroll perspective, it's also a known bad practice in Web2 to reveal everyone's salary within the company. In fact, I've personally experienced this in the past, right? It's not difficult to look at, Etherscan and see how much everyone's making. So I think, yeah, at the minimum, a layer of confidentiality on the amount being transferred should make sense. And also, if we were to zoom out, right, I think if we want to use blockchain as kind of like the value layer of human coordination, then revealing everyone's bank account in the open can be quite risky as well, right? You don't want your neighbor to know that you have a couple million in crypto. You also don't want them to know that you bought a croissant like 3 years ago. These are all the information that if we really want to use blockchain as the value layer, I think there needs to be a minimum amount of confidentiality.
There are two types of data people don't like to disclose. their health, and their finances.
Right.
I guess maybe political preferences too, right?
Yeah.
Could be another one. But financial data and health data are so personal because they reveal so much about who you are. I remember American Express at the time did like an experiment using machine learning. They could predict 6 months in advance when a couple was going to separate, just looking at their financial transactions.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just like one example. You can determine so many things. Like you can guess when someone's pregnant. You can guess when someone is having financial problems and is about to go bankrupt. You just don't want this information to be public. So if we're really going to be making blockchain the financial rails of the world, it makes no sense that everything should be public on it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the repercussions are not just financial. Like you said, you could lose a job. You could, prevent you from getting hired. You could create family issues because of political differences. All these things, from a practical perspective, wouldn't make sense. And this is where also I see FHE in blockchain bringing a lot of value, is bringing more Web2-like use cases and experiences that just aren't feasible today on public blockchains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Cypherpunk manifesto? Have you read that?
That was a while ago. Yeah.
So the Cypherpunk manifesto was basically this manifesto cryptographer wrote in the 90s that laid out what they believed was important for a digital society. And the two key things they wanted was a digital financial system and confidentiality, right? These were the two things. And what they believed that this should be done through cryptography. Satoshi, inventor of Bitcoin, obviously, was a cypherpunk. And so he solved the problem of digital financial transactions. But it wasn't private. Privacy was solved by PGP and asymmetric cryptography, where you could encrypt messages you're sending. But nobody had really found a way to do digital, decentralized, permissionless, confidential transactions yet. And this is what FHEs really bring to the table. Like when you actually look at this 1990s vision that underlies all of privacy and blockchain and Bitcoin today, privacy is a key part of it. And now it's finally doable.
Yeah, I think all these different cryptographies are finally coming together. And I think, confidentiality definitely being kind of like the next frontier of what people should be thinking about to make it more, more suitable for mass adoption is going to be extremely important in the next, 5-10 years. Yeah, so I guess, Ren, why is privacy such an interesting topic to you? Could you maybe expand more on that?
That dates from a long time ago. When I was a teenager in the 90s, I knew how to code already, and I built a social network, a website social network. That was in '99, so before Facebook and everything. And part of this social network was, the ability to send messages to people. So there was like a messaging feature with a profile and everything. I had a bully at school. A guy that was like 2 years older than me. I was 14, he was 16. When you're 14, 16, it's a big difference, right? Like he was very tall and I was not that tall. And so I couldn't really defend myself physically. So at some point I thought, what can I do so that this guy stops harassing me, right? And I thought, well, hold on. My social network is pretty popular amongst teenagers in France. Maybe he's a user. So I went into the database, looked up his messages. So he was a user. Looked up his messages and found a bunch of embarrassing stuff. So the next time he came to me at school and started physically pushing me around, I said, hey, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to tell everyone about XYZ secret that you have, right? Yeah. He never approached me ever again, right? So, there was justice, right? I was able to fight back against the bully thanks to, access to something that I had. But I couldn't stop thinking that this was wrong, right? Just because I was operating this website didn't mean I had the right to look into people's private messages, no matter the circumstances. And so it kind of kept on back of my mind. I was like, man, this is wrong. What is happening with all those other websites we're using? Are they doing the same thing I just did to this guy, but like on a much bigger scale? started thinking about surveillance, like, oh, are governments actually using this to look into everybody's lives? And when I got into my PhD, I was working on genetic information. And so that was obviously something very private that you needed some kind of confidentiality when you're processing the data. So this added on top of that, and one thing led to another, it became clear to me that as an entrepreneur, my whole career had to be around privacy. So my previous company was an AI company with a focus on privacy for AI. My current company, Zama, is a cryptography company bringing, confidentiality and privacy to every other applications. And I think, I won't stop until the whole internet is encrypted end to end.
So yeah, this is definitely super exciting. And then to expand more on that, where do you see the development of FHE or adoption of FHE happen in the next 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years? And how do you see this technology being adopted incrementally across different verticals or even the internet itself? Yeah.
Well, that's a open discussion, of course, but our strategy at Zama is first to make FHE work, and not just work in terms of what you can do with it, but also very easy to use for developers. Because if developers can't use that, if they have to be expert cryptographers, you're never going to have ubiquitous deployment of FHE, right? So we spent a considerable amount of time and effort making sure that people could use FHE without knowing anything about cryptography. That's done. Today, as a data scientist, as a smart contract developer, you don't have to know anything about how FHE works to actually use it in your applications. So the next step is, all right, so how do you build a business, right? What are the interesting markets we can go after? It turns out that blockchain is an incredible market for FHE for two reasons. First, everything on a blockchain is public. So either you use FHE and you can do confidential stuff, or you don't use FHE and don't do those applications. And secondly, blockchains are fairly slow and expensive compared to Web2 services, which is great for where FHE is today in terms of performance. So we believe very strongly that blockchain is going to be the main driver of adoption for FHE in the first place. But long term, this is really just scratching the surface. What we are working on that we are excited about is also confidential AI. If everything is going to be AI, then we should make sure that we protect the user's data and the company information using those services. And so really long term, what we aspire to do is to have like a new internet protocol for end-to-end encryption, like an HTTPZ. And the same way we went from HTTP to HTTPS, where there was no encryption, to encrypting data we're sending, we now want to go from HTTPS to HTTPZ, where the data is encrypted end-to-end, even during processing. And when that happens, when you can build like an internet level protocol that guarantees privacy for everyone, users are never going to have to think about it anymore. Nobody will care about privacy, not because it's not important, but because it won't be a problem anymore.
It's very interesting how, in the vision you described, FHE almost has some properties of blockchain already to either remove middlemen or at least the trust of a middleman, right? The idea is this, right? You can give your data in an encrypted manner, they can compute on top of it, service you, while knowing that, all your data is being protected. So I think definitely, it's definitely an interesting and exciting vision. If it does come to fruition, I think there could be a lot of...
I hadn't thought about it this way. But yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Like, FHE is a way to remove trust and dependency on like a third party for trust of your data, right?
Yeah. Because, fundamentally, so I used to, run a consulting shop for blockchain. And then the first question I would ask people is, do you need a blockchain? And fundamentally, you only need a blockchain if there is a trust issue in somewhere in your system, right? So I do think FHE does have a significant role in overlapping in that terms of like value proposal.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I like that. I might steal that.
Yeah. I guess like the next question is, what's currently what are the biggest challenges for FHE to become more mainstream today? And how do you think this will evolve over time?
When we started Zama in 2020, there were 3 issues with FHE. First, it was very slow. Second, it was extremely hard to use. Like, unless you had a PhD in cryptography, you couldn't really use it. And third, it was very limited in the type of applications you could build. You could do very simple stuff, but you couldn't do, smart contracts or AI. So fast forward to today, We've made FHE extremely easy to use for developers. No need to know anything about cryptography. That's done. We've extended the capabilities of FHE to support any type of application, however complicated they are. That's done. Yeah. And we are on track to have made FHE 100 times faster than when we started a company 4 years ago. Yeah. But this 100x, even though it's great for blockchain, and it gives you the ability to have, between 20 and 50 transactions per second, it's still not AI scale. If you want to start doing large language models in AI, then we need another 100 or 1000x speed up over that, which I believe is going to come from a combination of better cryptography, of course, but also hardware acceleration. So one thing I'm really looking forward to the next couple of years are those FHE ASICs, so kind of like GPUs for FHE. Yep. They will bridge this final gap and make FHE deployable, not just in blockchain, not just in simple cloud applications, but anywhere on the internet.
Got it. What's kind of the timeline that you're thinking of for this to come to fruition?
There are a number of companies working on FHE accelerators, and they're all planning to have a product in 2025. I think probably the V2 of their product will be like the key hockey stick moment. So starting 2025, we should see a drastic acceleration of the adoption of FHE. And probably from 2027, it should become like a standard part of your security stack. But as for like cloud applications, for blockchain, we don't have to wait that long. Right. Because we're not trying to run an LLM in a split second on a blockchain. Right. So that works today. And we can deploy FHE networks right now and have almost the same user experience as you have without FHE on blockchain.
Right. And this is back to what you were saying earlier. I think in blockchain, people are willing to wait, willing to pay the money to transact. So I think, this makes FHE a little bit more easier to adopt as a starting point within the blockchain space.
I think it's great, because every user of an FHE blockchain application will contribute to making FHE more ubiquitous, right? Because they're going to be funding research in FHE by being users and basically using the service, right? Like it creates momentum, it creates a need, it creates a market. And if there isn't a market, it's hard to continue working on something forever, right? So I think it's really important that people start using FHE today, because that's just going to guarantee that eventually it'll be everywhere.
Correct. And maybe just to go back to a little bit more, focusing more on FHE and blockchain, and maybe more on the use cases. So we talked about payroll, which is definitely a strong pain point. We talked about a little bit about DID. Maybe more on the DID side of things. In your opinion, how could you see this being adopted within the crypto ecosystem over a long period of time?
Well, I think with the rise of AI, identity becomes a real issue. Look at WorldCoin, right? Where we're trying to solve. So I think having a way to verify someone's identity on chain without everybody knowing that person is who that person is, right? You still want to keep that private, right? Opens up a bunch of use cases where Sybil resistance is important, right? Airdrop, hey, if you have a real identity attached to an airdrop, without the person doing the airdrop knowing anything about the identity of the person, right? So no leakage of your KYC information, nothing, right? That solves a big problem. I think for games, it's also important because, obviously, if you can create 25 different accounts and play a game, collusion is, an issue. But just in general, compliance and mass adoption of DeFi, you cannot do that if you cannot have an identity on chain.
And also, what I think is very interesting within DID with FHE is FHE enables for encrypted comparisons. So now for the first time, we can actually store encrypted data points on chain, which let's say your credit score or your age, which could be the timestamp on the day you were born.
I think that's a huge use case, by the way, like uncollateralized credit. The only way to do that on chain is to have access to personal information about the user so that, if the person doesn't pay, you can sue them. So you can think about a credit system where, so a user puts on chain an encrypted identity, right, with an encrypted credit score, okay? And as a lender, you could basically have a set of filters that say, I only want to lend to people that have this amount of income, this credit score, and who are US citizens.
Right.
Why would you want to do that? Because if you're a US entity lending money, then you want to have some kind of recourse if the person doesn't pay. And you could programmatically, in the smart contracts, like reveal the identity of the borrower to the lender if they don't pay.
Yeah.
Right?
That's super interesting. It's almost a completely different primitive in terms of like under collateralized lending.
Completely. I mean, that's what banks do. You can do that on chain.
Yeah.
Right? With exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
With the same level of legal protection for the lender, with the same level of like, I would say, credit risk assessment on the user, but you can do it on chain without a middleman.
Right.
Peer to peer.
Right.
You can do all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
So again, we're bringing in more Web2 like experiences, but without the middleman, essentially, which is a very interesting concept.
We have to, right? I mean, let's be honest. Blockchain is really good for anything related to money. Right. So the more financial products we can do on chain, the more people we can onboard to blockchain, and then we can start giving them other use cases, right?
Yeah.
But the primary use case of a blockchain, what is really good for, is moving money around.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And that seems like something that you would want a lot of confidentiality for.
Yeah. And the other aspect that I found, on-chain DID to be very interesting with FHE is, today DIDs are just public NFTs, right? They're static. So for one, they're static. And for two, you're kind of revealing all your information to everyone. Mm-hmm. But if you have a layer of confidentiality where applications can query for specific insights, then it becomes more of a dynamic programmable layer of DID that could be more composable, but also generally a little bit more useful and practical in the long term. And so the analogy that I personally think is very similar is, let's say you have Google Auth, right? When you connect to an application, maybe you just want people to query maybe your calendar, but not your Google Drive, right? So I think in this sense, I think here again, I think we're bringing in more of a Web2-like experience that I think folks are more familiar with.
That's right. One thing I've been also looking into a lot is health related application on chain. Impossible to do today. Like you wouldn't put your DNA on a blockchain. Well, it wouldn't fit anyway, but assuming it would, right? You wouldn't put it there.
Yeah.
We could solve that. Like, you could, for example, have an on-chain 23andMe where everything is verifiable, all the payment is done on-chain, right? Maybe the data is stored, off-chain in a DA somewhere like Filecoin or something like that. But because it's encrypted, there's no risk of data leakage, right? And so how big would that be, right? If you can have like a 23andMe blockchain product, huge, right? And this extends to all of healthcare. I mean, what are the biggest markets in the world? Finance, healthcare, real estate, right? Finance, you need confidentiality. Healthcare, it's not even negotiable. And even real estate, I would argue that there is a use case for FHE. If you're going to be tokenizing real estate, you might want to keep some information confidential about the property unless you are one of the owners or shareholders of like the tokenized thing, right? And in general, I think real-world assets benefit a lot from FHE if you want to tokenize them and put them on a public blockchain.
Is this maybe like a Web2 use case that you see with FHE, also healthcare and FHE?
Of course.
And I guess could you maybe expand on that? And are there ways that you think we could tie that into blockchain as well?
I think what you said makes sense. A blockchain is needed when you need verifiability or trust, or like trust, we have trust issues.
Right.
I think healthcare has a trust issue. And you want to be able to verify that whatever diagnosis you got is correct in a way, right? Especially when this is going to be done with AI, right? You want transparency, you want auditability, you want all of that. But in general, I think that like there's a lot of Web2 use cases, obviously, that don't require blockchain, right?
Yes.
But they still require FHE because you still want confidentiality.
Yes. And
I think this is most of what we do. I think every SaaS company eventually is going to be running on FHE, because why would they want to have any cybersecurity risk holding customer or user data? Like, why would you want that? If you're able to offer the same service, get paid the same amount of money, but not have to worry about data security and privacy issues and GDPR and all these things, why wouldn't you? Right? And so I think that eventually FHE is just going to be part of like the standard security stack of Web2 companies. The same way they encrypt data at rest,
Right.
they would encrypt it during computation as well.
Yep. And I think if there's a way to tie, Web2 plus FHE with blockchain, then I think some kind of a marketplace for your own data could be a little bit more feasible and more realistic.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I think this is an obvious use case, right? Like data marketplaces.
Right.
Again, a blockchain could be good for that. You store FHE encrypted data somewhere, right?
Right.
And you enable people to run computation on the data without revealing it, and you monetize the output. It's like, hey, you want to run your machine learning model on my data? Okay, but I'm not going to give you my data. I'm going to let you compute on my data over like a blockchain.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to pay me, and only when you pay me, I'm going to allow you to decrypt the result of your computation.
Right.
Right? How many things could that be applied to? Like a zillion.
Exactly. And also, this concept of like federated learning could also be super interesting, where, you don't care who's running these models, as long as they can generate some kind of ZK proof. They run some machine learning model, convert that end result, that model, weight model, into ciphertext, and then put it back to a smart contract. You can compute the kind of like the average new weights. Exactly. And you can even slash them if the standard deviation is too far away from like everyone else, right? I think it could be very interesting.
I think there are a few companies working on like decentralized training. Yeah. And they could be good users for FHE, indeed.
Yeah. And then maybe lastly, more about gaming. So, I grew up playing a lot of video games. And
what did you play?
The first game I ever played was Pokemon when I was 5, right? But even in a game like Pokemon, you need confidentiality because, it's a turn-based game. However, both players have to lock in the moves ahead of time. The reason why is some moves are faster, right? I can do a quick attack and kill you before you kill me. Or, some moves can counter other moves. If I fly away, put a barrier.
Yeah, if you know that, well.
So today, in public blockchains, you are sort of limited to some kind of commit reveal scheme, which, could take multiple transactions. There's also the need for somewhat of a more centralized infra to coordinate the salts, do the reveal. With FHE here, I think one benefit is, you can directly encrypt your move and then settle, the outcome. So this is more from, just a basic game mechanic that I think makes the game a little bit more challenging. I think the other ones are, if you can start bluffing, right? So this is a kind of the mafia game that we built previously, which I think is a very novel experience in the crypto space. You're not able to build a game like this if everything is transparent. There's no challenge, right? And then I think all the other just basic mechanics, for strategy games, you want to be able to conceal your resources. Else, why should I ever attack you if I know you're stronger than me, right? So to me, I think FHE or confidentiality in blockchain is going to unlock quite a bit of fun games with the mechanics that actually makes the game fun generally. Yeah.
But even simple games, right? Like playing Wordle on chain, right? Or GeoGuessr on chain. You could actually have like an on-chain decentralized GeoGuessr competition where people could like basically bet on what they're discovering. You could have like the whole gameplay could be completely on chain, basically, right? So like there's an infinite number of possibilities.
Correct.
And they don't have to be complicated games that require 10,000 transactions per second for gameplay, right? They can be more asynchronous type of games that are still going to be super interesting to play.
Exactly.
And I think that's a good way. Casual games is a good way to onboard people into blockchain.
Yep. Yeah, the simplest form, like a Hangman game where you guess the words.
Yeah.
One game that we are planning to
tokenize it, and then now you have an incentive for people to play.
Exactly. One game that we are planning to basically showcase during ETH Denver and get people to play is the 2-3 guessing game.
Okay.
So the rules is basically everyone get to guess a number between 0 and 100. The goal is whoever gets the closest to 2/3 of everyone's guess wins, right? So it's basically like a social experiment but you could also prioritize it and make it more of a fun, guessing game.
Are you going to give Inco tokens?
So this is more for fun. Maybe some pull-up, some NFT for participation.
Nice. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is totally feasible, right? Because to calculate the average guess, you just have to do some additions, divisions, all through FHE, and then everyone submits their hidden guess, right?
Nice.
Yeah. And I guess maybe on the last, just one more thing is around DeFi. I think confidential DeFi has, some folks like Tarun has explored this in the past. And I think confidentiality generally will probably have a comeback in the crypto space. And within that, how do you build confidential DeFi without leaking information, right? So for example, if you have two pools, token A, token B, that are encrypted, the amount that you get out or the yield that you offer for like a money market could reveal some information, right? So I guess have you thought more about some mechanics that could, prevent this?
I mean, an even simpler version of that is if you have an ERC20 contract, you want the total supply to be public, but balances to be private. The problem is when people deposit money and you have to mint tokens,
right?
You can like basically keep track of the differences in supply to know how much was deposited, right? So that concept is something called differential privacy.
Right.
And there are multiple techniques that exist to solve these kind of issues. The most common one is you need to effectively have some kind of random noise on the public information so that people would only know that it's like within X%. So you wouldn't know if it's like, it wouldn't be the exact supply, it would be the supply plus or minus some value, right? And so you could do the same thing here for the pools, right?
Just add in some noise so that you cannot backtrack. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Although I'm not sure that you necessarily want to keep the amount in the pool confidential itself, right? It might be enough to keep the transaction coming in confidential to avoid MEV.
Correct. Yeah, it depends on the angle here. If it's just MEV protection, then maybe you don't need that much, ways to prevent
like
leakage.
The pool can be public.
Correct.
The transaction can be private, and then you just basically have like, I guess you would need like some kind. Actually, no, you know what? It's not actually trivial. I think you need some kind of differential privacy on the bonding curve of the pool somehow.
Yeah. Or even for yield, money markets, if you just add in the randomness, then maybe that's good enough, right? Just you might get a little bit more or a little bit less.
I think like a good use case for FHE and DeFi would actually be TWAPs or OTC trades. So the ability for people to trade confidentially in kind of like in a dark pool type of setup. That would be very easy to do at FHE.
Yep. Correct. And maybe we should just talk about a little bit more on the randomness aspect because we didn't touch upon that. So could you maybe explain a little bit how FHE can enable randomness within, let's say, the blockchain ecosystem infrastructure?
So randomness is important for games, for many use cases where you need to just like have a random value, right? Right now on a blockchain, because everything is public and deterministic, well, you can't really generate randomness because, well, you would know the randomness in advance and, well, not really fun for a game, right? Again.
Right.
So what people have been doing is they've been using external random generators and making a transaction back on chain, with the value. With FHE, we have a way to generate encrypted random numbers. So effectively what that means is there is an on-chain generator of randomness, but the output is encrypted. So nobody knows what random value was just outputted, but you can generate as many as you want during the production of a block, right? So every contract could just generate as much randomness as they need on the fly, just like they do any kind of computation, in the contract. And then you decrypt the value the same way you would decrypt anything that's encrypted on chain. So that's huge, right? Because, on-demand randomness on chain without an external random oracle is, it seems like a small feature, but it's a huge enabler of use cases.
Yeah, definitely. And then especially in gaming, I think all the games that are actually fun require some element of randomness.
Yeah.
Right. Even in the case of Pokemon, right? There is the chance for you to critical hits, miss, And that, randomness factor can also just add more, more
Right.
like a prediction of the outcome, right?
Exactly.
And I think also one aspect that I think is probably the most unique about this randomness is that it's going to be hidden by default, right? So for card games like poker or even the Mafia game, right? It's a hidden game, so you need to generate a hidden role, whether you're the doctor, killer, or the detective. So that's also very unique in the crypto space that I think can enable a lot more unique bluffing games.
Yes, it's a new design space.
Yep. Yeah, I guess today we talked about many things, DeFi, DID, gaming. It is definitely a greenfield of opportunities and new design space. I think there will be novel primitives and also novel experiences within the blockchain space.
I agree. I think it's going to be, we're going to have a lot of fun building that for sure.
Yeah. I guess we can probably just, discuss more about our collaboration between Zama and Inco. So, obviously very excited to work with you guys.
As we are.
You guys are the leading, cryptographers in the FHE space. And I really like the fact that you have created your product, especially TFHE.RS product in a way that's so easy to use, which is really, I think, the crucial and also step one for any mass adoption of any groundbreaking technologies is to make it as easy to consume and build on top, which I think you guys did an amazing job.
Thank you.
Yeah, other than that, we at Inco, we are very excited to, deliver a blockchain infrastructure that brings confidentiality to the space. We'd like to enable, developers to really create novel applications and bring something net new to the space, which we believe, confidentiality will push for the next frontier of applications. And, fast forward, 10 years from now, I think this confidentiality problem will be a solved problem in the crypto space, especially if you want, blockchain to be massively adopted as this, value layer.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, on that end, anything you wanted to add?
I think, for us, it's super exciting because as a technology developer, our stuff only makes sense when people use it to build something in production, right? And so it's very exciting for us to see, you guys in Co actually launching this and starting to think about all the different use cases can be built. It also gives us a lot of good insights on what we should be focusing on, as a FHE cryptography company, so that your users can do even more things and, do as what you said, make blockchains confidential within 5 years. So I'm super, super excited about that. I think what you guys are doing are things that we wouldn't be able to do ourselves. We're very good at doing tech, but I think it's a different kind of skill set to launch a network and get people to use it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Ren, for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,